Good morning, everybody. I chose to go to the South today as a typical loving Nigerian, and it is a pleasure to welcome all of you to yet another stimulating and informative virtual seminar. Before we listen to Dr. Gloria Eri of the Faculty of Law, I would like us to listen to Dr. Biola Ademola for 2 minutes. Dr. Ademola is a senior lecturer and a legal practitioner with the University of Ilorin. As you all know, last week was the annual World Refugee Day. Whether we talk about migration in any context, you'll see that people are continually being forced into migrating or leaving their homeland. Some are a good success stories, others are horrible stories. One of the good success story of a migrant is the current mayor in what we call Trump's own country in the state of Utah, 99% white. Yet this refugee that left Liberia in the midst of the Civil War and ended up in this part of the United States is today flowering, and he has emerged, just like Barack Obama, as the first mayor in a state 100% white. Such is the success story. But in honor of the World Refugee Day, because refugee is also an aspect of migration, I want to give 2 minutes to Dr. Ademola, the president of the Association of Commonwealth Scholars Alumni in Nigeria, to speak to us just for 2 minutes. And that is why we are starting ahead of 11 o'clock. So after 2 minutes, I will formally introduce Dr. Ere, who will speak for 30 minutes. And then we'll do the normal tradition of comments and questions. Dr. Biola Ademola, you have the space. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ademola, I have unmute you. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, sir. And I want to thank you for the opportunity you have given to me this morning to say one or two things about the celebration of the World Refugee Day. Actually, World Refugee Day is celebrated every year on the 20th of June. And it was passed at the United Nations General Assembly in December 2000. And since 2001, it has been celebrated. And the former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan asked this to say, that I urge you to celebrate the extraordinary courage and contributions of refugees, past and present. And the reason why this is celebrated is actually to let the whole world know what the refugees are passing through. And not only that, the theme every year is to encourage all of us. For this purpose, when we talk of refugees, we are also referring to asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, stateless persons, and returnees. For 2020, the theme is every action counts. And this is in the effort to create a more just, inclusive, and equal world, as we all know. We already have the statistics of how many refugees we are having all over the world. According to UNHCR, it is 65.3 million. They have been forcibly displaced from their homes. And in Nigeria, according to the IOM statistics that were released in April 2020, we have 2,406,604 internally displaced persons in Nigeria. For this year, this is what the UNHCR chief executive had to say, Filippo Grandi. He has noted that the 2020 World Refugee Day is marked against a backdrop of a dramatic global crisis. Not only are records of numbers of people forced from their home, but the world is grappling with COVID-19, a disease that is still very much affecting us all. In this COVID-19 challenging time, we have seen a connectedness that transcends borders. Ordinary people have stepped up to help. Host communities are engaging them, especially in those low and middle income, where 90% of the world's refugees live. And we have also seen that the refugees themselves are contributing in significant ways despite their current situation. We have noted that some of them are volunteering as health workers in Colombia and in United Kingdom. Some are making soap for distribution in Lebanon and in Niger, sewing masks and protective gears in other places. So what we are expected to do as scholars and practitioners in peace is that for all purposes, the reference persons, by allowing them to be part and parcel of the community. And the responsibility is that we can welcome refugees into our communities. And if we welcome and accept them, it is possible that they can also be strengthened, they can be encouraged, they can persevere, and also contribute their own quota to the world economy as it is being done in the United States. It's on record that about 40% of the income generation in the United States are through the businesses of the refugees. We can also do that. So the clarion call today for all of us for greater global solidarity and action is to include and support refugees, internally displaced persons, stateless persons, asylum seekers, and all the like. No matter who we are, wherever we are, what we can do is to support them. Every action that we take truly counts, and we encourage us to do an action today to support the refugees and the IDPs. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Ademola. We appreciate you. Let's move on to the substantive matter for today, and that is the presentation by Dr. Gloria Erima Eri. Dr. Gloria Erima Eri is the HOD of Private and Property Law Department, the Faculty of Law, National Open University of Nigeria. And Dr. Erima is also one of the fellows, pioneer fellows of the Center for Excellence in Migration and Global Studies. The title of our paper is Migration and Human Rights Protection in Nigeria amid COVID-19 issues and challenges holding the Nigerian government accountable. Dr. Gloria, Dr. Eri, are you in the house? Dr. Eri? Loaded. Arima. On mute. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you loud and clear.
Good morning, Prof.
Good morning. I'm trying to project your... Go ahead, please. Use your PowerPoint at your hand while I'm projecting from my hand. Sharing, rather.
Thanks, sir. Good morning, Prof. Good morning, other professors and fellow participants. The topic for discussion today is migration and human rights protection in Nigeria amidst COVID-19 issues and challenges, holding the Nigerian government accountable. On the screen, you'll find the outline displayed. I think Professor Tijani is trying to do that.
Work, speak to what you have. I'm working on sharing it. Unfortunately, one of us decided to take over and trying to share something. So I blocked that person, and the person is creating this technical itch, and I'm not happy, but I will speak to that later. That is why. Please speak to what you have, Dr. Arima. Yeah.
The outline, this is the outline. I have an introduction, statement of the problem, then conceptual clarification. Under conceptual clarification, I'll be looking at migration, human rights, and COVID-19 pandemic. I'll also look at the nexus between migration and human rights. The next session will then look at the legal framework for protection of the migrants' rights internationally and in Nigeria. Under the international framework, I'll be looking at the legal and institutional framework. After that, I'll come to the domestic framework, which is the Nigerian one. Also look at the legal and institutional framework before I'll consider the issues and challenges that militate against the protection of the rights of the migrants, and also look at the strategies we can use to overcome the challenges. On the challenges, on the issues, I have about 7 issues for discussion: the legal gap, the enforcement, institutional challenges, racial inequality, data, social security system, and the last, access to courts. I will then give, by way of I will then conclude the presentation and proffer some suggestions.
Dr. Oye, Doc.
Yes, yes, sir.
Can you, if I give you the right to share, can you share the PowerPoint? Or should I proceed with your initial draft, the paper itself that I'm sharing now?
You can proceed with the initial draft while I speak to what I have here. It's been I've edited it, but
okay, go ahead,
essentially it's the same. Yes.
Go ahead.
By introduction, I'll start by stating that in our present, migration is inevitable. Migration is simply the movement of people from one place to another. Indeed, it is part of human history, as several rights are innate to humankind, can be internal and external. 72 million international migrants, comprising about 3.5% of the human population. This is as per the data given by the World Migration Report 220. There are many causes of migration, like ethnic and religious conflicts, environmental disasters, lack of employment, lack of safety nets, corruption, search for greener pastures, pastures, and so on. As of 2019, Nigeria has about 1.3 million international migrants abroad. There's also a huge population of internal migrants in Nigeria. These migrants have human rights, which are moral principles describing certain standards of human behavior that must be protected. This leads me to the statement of the problem. For Nigeria, the problem is that these two groups that I've mentioned constitute the migrants whose rights are being violated by reason of their migration, leading ultimately to the undermining of their rights, human dignity, general well-being, and overall contribution to the national development. The situation is presently being exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. The migrants within Nigeria, which contributes about 65% of the GDP, while the international migrants abroad are mainly in the formal sector, contributing about $25 billion US dollars annually, equivalent of about 6.1% of the GDP, to support the Nigerian economy. It therefore goes without saying that this segment of the Nigerian population is very important to the Nigerian socioeconomic development to deserve protection. Despite government's effort to address the issues, there are still legal gaps in the protection of these migrants. There's therefore need to examine the issues and proffer solutions. The objective of this paper, therefore, is to illustrate the issues and challenges which militate against the protection of the rights of the migrants amidst COVID-19 pandemic, with a view to making recommendations to facilitate policy development by government. The next section is on conceptual clarification. Here there are basically three concepts to be clarified. The first is migration. The second is human rights, and economic. Migration has been defined by several scholars in different ways, which I will not bore you with. However, for our discussion here, I would like to adopt the definition given by the Geographic Scientific Society, which describes migration as the movement of people from one place to another, to live from one place to live in another. In our discussion today, this definition should be construed broadly without reference to the legal status of the migrants, to include also refugees, migrants within Nigeria who have been affected by the lockdown of cities, such as house helps, shoe shiners, truck pushers, Amadri who, though originally came to learn, but appear some of them are abandoned to now fend for themselves. Also the semi-skilled workers in the informal sector. All this constitute the migrants that we'll be looking at today. Where this movement is within the country, it is referred to as internal migration. Where such movement is between one country and another, one country to another, it is referred to as international migration. This in this question, I'll move on to clarify the concept of human rights. According to United Nations, these rights are inherent to all ethnicity, language, or any other status. The human rights include the right and liberty.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I think Dr. Orie is experiencing a bad network. You can see that the system says she left and then she will rejoin. I've also shared with all of you the PowerPoint on the WhatsApp group for CEMGS, so you can open it if you have access to your phone for that. So we are waiting on her to join us again. Can anyone confirm if you received the PowerPoint on the CEMGS? Okay. Okay, go ahead. Okay, it's not received yet. Yeah. Dr. Rima, you're back. I've unmuted you. You
Yes.
can proceed, please.
Okay, sir. I was just saying that I sent you another mail containing, attaching the latest version, but I'm back. I will continue now. I said that the next concept to clarify is human rights. And I mentioned that, can you hear me, sir?
We can hear you, ma. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, we can.
I said, according to United Nations, these rights are inherent to all human beings, regardless of their race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, or religion, or include the right to life, the right to human dignity, the right to freedom of movement, freedom from slavery or torture, the right of expression of opinion, the right to work. And I said that everyone is entitled to these rights. Let me now clarify the coronavirus disease, popularly referred to as COVID-19. According to WHO 2020, it is an infectious disease first detected in Wuhan, caused by the newly discovered virus called severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2. As a date, the World Health has not confirmed any drug or vaccine for both the treatment, for either the treatment or the cure. Since its emergence, it has spread in so many countries. In fact, it's said that it's only Antarctica that is currently being spared, that otherwise that every other continent is engulfed in it. According to the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, as at date, there are about 20,244 confirmed cases in Nigeria, with about 518 deaths across the states. COVID-19, therefore, is real and also affects Nigerians who are migrants, either internal migrants or international migrants. The next section will then be the nexus between migration and human rights, having done the clarification of the concepts. How are they actually connected? Several rights of humankind are basically innate and attaches to the person by mere reason that he is a human being, irrespective of the movement and migration status. The status as migrants attaches certain rights, which sometimes are breached. The fact remains that the breaches of these rights affect the migrants, both in the country of origin and the host country. By virtue of being migrants, therefore, they are disadvantaged. By way of discrimination, they suffer loss of respect, loss of dignity, low esteem. And these are people that ordinarily are supposed to be respected, with their rights protected, so that they can contribute to the general well-being and sustainability, and their sustainability enhanced. All this point to the fact that there's a nexus between migration and human rights, such that where these rights are well protected through quality education and health care as human being, the migrant is more able to survive, and his productivity is enhanced with increased remittances to their dependents, which in turn improves the general well-being of the dependents, and by extension, Nigeria. The next section is on international framework for protecting the rights of these migrants. There are two frameworks here, namely the legal and institutional framework. I would like to start with the legal framework. These international laws include the United Nations International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of Their Families. It's a 1990 law regulation. There's also the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the first optional protocol, which entered into force in 1976. On display, you will find a plethora of the laws, which, because it's on display, I will not bore you with. But it's important to note that these conventions and protocols are basically they basically seek to promote and protect the right to work and favorable, in just and favorable condition, the right to social protection, to an adequate standard of living, and to the highest attainable standards of physical and mental well-being. It also seeks to protect the right to education and enjoyment of benefits of cultural freedom and scientific progress. I'll now go over to the institutional framework. The International Labour Organization tries to collaborate with other relevant institutions that deal with labor migration, like the IMO, International Maritime Migration Organization, and the United Nations Commission for Human Rights. It promotes the ratification, that is the ILO. It promotes the ratification and effective application of ILO conventions and recommendations as appropriate, and policy frameworks relevant relevance to the governance of labor migration and protection of the migrant worker to ensure international labor standards. This takes me to the legal framework for the protection of migrants' rights in Nigeria. What we've just looked at is international aspects. Here again, I'll also be looking at the institutional framework, the legal framework and the institutional framework, and also the policy. With regards to the policy, there are migration-related policies. There is the ECOWAS migration protocols. There's also the 2004 Nigerian Labor Migration Policy, the NLMP. The labor migration policy was followed by the National Migration Policy of 2015. And a draft policy on diaspora matters in 2016. The National Health Information System policy also recommends a health data governance structure for Nigeria for coordination of the governance of the health of information of the migrant worker. There's also the policy on international displaced persons, the IDPs. The National Migration Policy, however, is the umbrella policy on migration, while others like the NLMP, IDPs policy are sector-specific policies. I will go over to the legal framework. The national labor, we have the African Charter on Human Rights and People's Rights Act. In these sections 2 to 24, dwelt extensively on the protection of the rights of the migrants. We also have the Child Rights Act, which has been domesticated, ratified and domesticated in Nigeria. We also have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Indeed, there are several of them that are on display on the screen. The institutional framework. The institutional framework has to do with the migration governance framework, which is modeled on the whole of governance approach as an institutional structure for the implementation of the national migration policy. The governance framework is made up of 4 levels of coordination, namely ministerial committee, technical group, the thematic group, and the state level, which is together with the non-state actors. Some of the relevant institutions that assist in this area include the Nigerian Immigration Service, the National Commission for Refugee Migration and Internally Displaced Persons, the National Commission for Refugees, the National Population Commission, the Ministry of Justice, Internal Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Labor and Productivity Ministry. However, the National Commission for Refugee Migration and Internally Displaced Persons, that is the NCFRMI, is expected to regulate the refugees and IDPs that are migrants, to regulate issues that have to do with their protection. The next section, by conclusion, by way of concluding this section, looking at the laws, one finds that these laws and policies are both international and national levels, and many. There are several of them in place for the protection of the rights of the migrants. It is noteworthy, however, that most of these laws at international level have been ratified by Nigeria, while some of them, but a great number of them, are yet to be assimilated, to be incorporated into Nigeria's body of laws, and so pose a challenge for effective implementation, particularly amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, the Child Rights Act has been domesticated, but it's not applicable in so many states of the Federation. Ditto for the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. However, not all the states in Nigeria, like I said, have applied it. So it's a problem, have applied the Child Rights Act. The next section for discussion is the issues and challenges that militate against the protection of the rights of the migrants and the strategies for overcoming these issues and challenges. There are about 7 of them I've looked at in this presentation. I would like to start with the legal gap. Where no specific legislative arrangements are made to incorporate the conventions and protocols into our national law, just like I said, that there are a number of them that were ratified but have not assimilated into our laws, it becomes a problem for implementation. Some of them that are yet to be incorporated into our laws include the Common Agenda for Migration and Mobility, which Nigeria has with EU, dates back to 2015. Also the Kampala Convention and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. In fact, this law has been there for more than 30 years, ratified by Nigeria for more than 30 years, but it is not yet incorporated into our body of laws. Over the years, Nigeria does not see the issue of domestication of laws as a priority, which is a major challenge. A way out of this is to quickly domesticate all such ratified laws to improve the protection of the rights of the migrants. In addition, states in Nigeria should be encouraged to transmit such domesticated laws like the Child Rights Act as edits for implementation at the state levels. The next issue for discussion is enforcement. As a result of restrictive interpretation by the courts, we have enforcement as a major issue. This is because internal migrants, where a court adopts, for the internal migrants, where a court adopts an unduly restrictive interpretation of the provisions of an instrument, it serves as a serious impediment to the full and proper implementation and enforcement of such regulation. For example, the right to health and the right to education in Nigeria. Both has over the years been accorded very restrictive interpretation by the courts, making them not to be justiciable because of Section 2 of Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution. This is actually different from what is obtained in other climes, like India, with a similar provision, but the court has been able to give a proactive interpretation, a more liberal interpretation that is not restricted, to ensure that such rights are justiciable. For example, in the case of Francis and Coralie again and Union Territory of India, the Supreme Court had an opportunity to expound on the rights, on these rights. Also in the case of Charan Lashuha and Union of India, the Supreme Court of India also did a similar thing. Akin to this is the fact that some cases involving abuse of migrants' rights are not even reported. Most times for cultural reasons. For instance, a house help that is living with relations may not want to easily say that his or her right is being abused. Sometimes they are not even aware of such an abuse. For the international migrants, there is available health infrastructure. However, the enforcement is fraught with injustice, discrimination, and racism, contrary to the provisions of many of the conventions and protocols. For example, the high death rate of Blacks, including Nigerians, in this ongoing pandemic have been traced to systemic racism and discrimination in breach of the victims' rights. The challenge is that the victims of such abuse in Nigeria are not protected and cannot effectively seek redress. The way forward, therefore, is for Nigerian courts to interpret such rights as complementary rights to the right to life, and as such, justiciable. In addition, to make it clearer, the National Assembly should amend the relevant sections of the Constitution. There is also the need for cultural reorientation and awareness campaign through federal agencies and civil society organizations for victims to be able to report such cases of abuse or infringement or breach of their human rights. Furthermore, for the international migrants, the Nigerian government, through its Diaspora Commission and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, should rise to the occasion by taking up such matters diplomatically in affected countries. This brings me to the next.
You have 2 minutes, please. 2 minutes, man.
I'll try. This brings me to the next issue for discussion, which is institutional framework. The challenge here is that the migrants easily get confused because of the multiplicity of institutions as to which ministry to approach to address a particular matter, and is even discouraged to seek redress. By way of strategy, I've looked at the Rossine reports to the federal government to say that that's a step in the right direction, and that the Nigerian embassies also should be proactive in dealing with such relevant organizations to protect the migrants' rights. The next issue for discussion is racial inequity. And I said for the international migrant, this borders on discrimination and lack of fairness and access to justice. Access in accessing the healthcare services, leading to breaches of his rights as provided under the conventions. We see that in the case of US, there's data to the fact that more Blacks died than the whites in the current pandemic. There's presently demonstration all over on the issue of Black racism. The strategy is for Nigerian embassies abroad to liaise with the Diaspora Commission to negotiate with relevant organs to protect the rights of the migrants, as was done in the case of the xenophobic attack in South Africa. On availability of data, the issue is that the dearth of data makes it difficult for proper planning towards the welfare of the migrants. Specifically in Nigeria, there is no current demography for profiling the internal migrants. The strategy for Nigeria must be for Nigerian government to develop the political will to leverage the existing ID card program, the bank verification program, the national census data to develop a comprehensive, disaggregated profile of migrants across the country. On social security system, this is a challenge because there is no social security system in Nigeria that covers the semi-skilled workers. Like when the palliative was shared, many of them did not get anything. The last issue for discussion is access to justice. Access to justice is to address breaches of the rights of the migrants. In Nigeria, most people cannot access justice for several reasons, ranging from prohibited costs to delay in adjustments, poor infrastructure. The way forward is to modernize the judicial system and incorporate alternative dispute resolution mechanism. In conclusion, the paper has illustrated the issues and challenges which militate against the protection of the rights of the migrants amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and proffered solutions. These solutions will make the Nigerian government to be held accountable. The recommendations you will find on the slide. The Nigerian government must find the political will as a matter of national policy to transmit or ratify regulations into the body of laws to enable application. The court should give the right to health and education a liberal interpretation so that they are made justiciable in Nigeria as complementary rights to the right to life in line with best practices. The federal government should also rationalize and harmonize as well as streamline all ministry commissions and agencies involved in the management of the migrants' rights. The Nigerian government also should develop the political will to leverage the existing national ID card program, bank verification number program, and national data to develop comprehensive disaggregated profile of migrants across the country. Last but not the least, the judiciary should extend the digitalization process of the courts, including the virtual session, to cover all courts in the country, as well as incorporate virtual alternative dispute resolution mechanism. This brings me to the end of my presentation, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Orie. We appreciate you. Despite the technical glitches, we were able to at least get to the end of the tunnel, and we thank you. I would take two people that have showed interest in asking question or a comment. First is Professor Eya, and then followed by Dr. Williams. So if you follow by Dr. Williams, then the Dean of Law, of course, is going to give the presenter another viva voce to defend our PhD thesis again. So the Dean of Law will go after Dr. Williams. Those are the three that I've seen. Let me be sure. I think Dr. Felice Binoba, it's better you kindly say, because this and it depends on when I scroll. Okay, so Dr. Felice Binoba or Benoba, Dr. Adegoke will follow after, make it just, Professor Sogolo after Adegoke, and then who else? Somebody clapping. Okay, Dr. Aminu. Okay, I have to take my former HOD before I get query. So I think that will be it for now. So please, 30 seconds each. Is Dr. Ada raising up are you raising up your hand? Dr. Ada? Okay, thank you. So we can start. Professor Eya, please. I've unmuted all of you, the people that will be speaking. So please speak.
Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning, sir.
My worry
morning,
is
sir.
on implementation. On implementation, beautifully made policies, laws, and all that. But when it comes to implementation, it becomes very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. And especially now, the abuse is so much. But whom do you report to? So I would like us to address implementation.
Okay, thank you, sir.
People cannot access justice easily.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, Dr. Williams.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, Ma. That was an excellent presentation. I've gone through your slide. I want to draw your attention back to one or two issues, which I think would be of help to the study. We all know that some of these international conventions, I want to take you back to the international legal frameworks, you know, and
Make it
we all
30
know,
seconds.
I'll do that. I am drawing her attention to the international legal framework, which we know that most African countries or states have not domesticated. We live in a very different era. If you look at the trend of events over the years, from 2015 up to date, quite a lot of things have changed. And I think maybe this could be some of the reasons why some of the states have not domesticated it. So to that extent, what do you think is a place of executive order in such a wartime like this? Because you're fighting a pandemic, and do you expect states to also adapt what you call human rights? Because we have seen it all over the world. So where is the place of human rights in a war situation? That's where I'm also coming from. And then we also know that in Africa, we deal with cultural issues. So where do we place our culture in this situation too? Thank you very much, man.
Thank you very much. Dean of Law.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir.
My observation, I have observations and questions. And I have to talk about it because my colleague, first of all, let me thank my colleague for her presentation. It's a wonderful presentation, but I have to make this contribution because of the legal issue she raised so that she can clarify it. There is a general principle of law recognized by civilized nations, and that principle is that one cannot approbate and reprobate at the same time. My dear friend, if you are inviting us to conclude with you that we should interpret migration broadly or beyond its legal interpretation, the implication is that a person who is not a migrant according to law cannot be treated as a migrant. You know, in your presentation, you say that we should do that. So if we now decide to interpret it broadly, outside the purview of the law, and that person is not, by that interpretation, we are taking it outside the meaning of migration ascribed to by law. There's an implication there because you cannot approbate and reprobate. Somebody who in the eyes of the law is not a migrant cannot be treated as a migrant. And that is why I disagree with your urging us to broadly interpret the meaning of migration. That is number one. Number two, I observe that in your trying to explain the nexus between migration, your explanation of the nexus between migration and COVID is hazy, because all migrants, it's not all migrants that are infected by COVID. A migrant may be convict-free. So I don't know whether you can explain the connection. It's not clear. Then the next thing is this. You talked about the African Charter on Peoples and Human Rights not being enforceable. I want you to look at the decision of the court in Ganifa-Emi against Sani Abacha, where the Supreme Court of Nigeria held that though the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is an international document, it has an internal flavor in the sense that it has been domesticated as part of Nigerian law, so it can be implemented as Nigerian law. The third thing is that you talk about the the Child Rights Act not being enforceable. Of course, the Child Rights Act, upon its ratification in Nigeria by the National Assembly in 2003, have become part and parcel of our domestic law. Of course, some states have reenacted the same as their state child law. It does not mean that a child's right can be violated in a state that has no child's law. Because at that time, in such a situation, the Child Right Act comes to cover the field. Then another point that you raised that I think we should also talk about, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, why don't you respond to this so that I don't bundle a lot of things together?
Thank you very much, Dean of Law. I told her she's going to redefense her PhD thesis, and you have just done that.
I have one more, so I'll respond to this first.
Okay. She will respond. I would like you to just mention the last one that you have,
okay,
but we're taking all comments and questions. And I'm giving you this latitude because you are from the same faculty, you are the dean.
Yes.
So that some of these fussiness about the legal framework, you can help us to entangle it. Thank you,
Good.
Sir.
The next thing I would advise, is a form of advice. There is no need to demarcate the existing legal regime into international regime and international regime. She cited ECOWAS as a part of the internal legal regime. ECOWAS is an international, ECOWAS protocol is an international legal regime considered under her demarcation as internal legal regime. Since international regimes are binding on Nigeria by virtue of the fact that Nigeria is a signatory to that treaty, all this legal regime should have been discussed as one as existing legal regime, not minding whether one is international or national. After all, ECOWAS, that is an international regime, was treated safely under internal regime. This goes to buttress that demarcation makes the job somehow clumsy. It's all of them.
Thank you very much, Dean of Law. The next person, I believe, is Dr. Felice Ginoba, followed by, okay, so please, 20 seconds, 20 seconds.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Orie, congratulations. This issue of domestication is what I want to talk about. At present, I'm in Ido local government area of Oyo State. In fact, when you say state domestication, how far has that state domesticated these laws even to the local government area? That is very important, because the further we can domesticate it, the nearer the people will be to it, and the implementation should be at that stage. Here we don't know about any migration law, anything. I went to Kila, which is on the way to Abeokuta, but in another state, the other day for to buy some things at a market. The police there, they are not even aware that some of these interstate lockdown thing has been toned down. Up till now, they are still holding people, taking money from them.
All right, can you hear me now?
These rights are...
No, Dean, wait.
Hello?
Dean of Law, kindly wait.
Can you hear me?
These rights...
We can hear you. Can you wait, please?
I've been unmuted, but I can't hear you.
These rights should be
unmutable. Please wait. Dr. Benoba is speaking, okay?
This domestication is a very important aspect of whatever we are doing, migration laws and so on. Domestication should be given the right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benoba. Thank you very much. Dean of Law, I thought you finished with your comment. The Dean of Law, sir. Can you hear us? Okay, the next speaker should please go ahead. I believe is Dr. Aminu.
Professor Sogolo.
Or is it Professor Sogolo?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. First of all, I want to congratulate Dr. Orie for the presentation. I followed through with keen interest, especially with her definitions, of what migration means and so forth, conceptual clarifications, and so forth. But I just looked through the entire presentation, and the question I asked is this: what exactly is the focus of this presentation? I can see a lot of signposting, putting hand in the areas of human rights, talking about COVID, talking about all sorts of concepts coming into the discussion. But the question I ask is this: what exactly is the focus of this presentation? Because, I was just thinking, where does COVID-19 come into this whole discussion? Because I didn't see it as a special presentation on migration, which has factors something to do with COVID-19. It's all right that she mentioned COVID-19, she mentioned a lot of other areas, but I'm finished to say, where is the beginning? Where is the beginning? Where is the conclusion of this presentation? So that is my problem. I didn't find it flowing, and to say, okay, this is the focus and this is the real substance of this presentation. I'm sorry to say
I've done that, but it's not, I can't hear you.
A lot of arguments, a lot of points, but, just moving from one point to the other, and each one makes, you have a point on each, and then you make a conclusion on each, but the overall focus of the paper seems to be lost. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Let me also join by thanking Dr. Erima Gloria for an excellent presentation. And I think I want to take off from where our distinguished Professor Emeritus hit on. That is the issue of the focus, because you spoke about COVID and you made mention of Black Americans in the US dying because of COVID, and indirectly linked it to migration, which the foundation have not been strongly established. And I ask myself, don't you think about genetic factors too, as part of the reason why Blacks are dying, or Hispanics, or Latinos in the US? This is the main issue. Your paper is full of data in the sense that you have touched on virtually what needs to be known about human rights, domestication of treaties, and others. And you raised this issue of CEDAW, Convention of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which is also another area that is linked to what Professor Soglo has said. And I asked myself whether you have touched on what we refer to, what is being commonly known as the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Bill, which is also another act. It's an act at the moment, which is also another instrument of ensuring that women are protected to a greater extent. I was privileged to be at the AU headquarters some years back on Kampala Convention, which is also indirectly not the Kampala Convention, but Abuja Declaration. It started in Abuja and ended up in Kampala. But the reality of the matter is, when we talk about rights, what of socio-cultural and economic factors when it comes to rights? Take, for example, domestication of the Child Rights Act. When you relate it with education, can government provide on the basis of the economic strength of the country? So making it justiciable also have its own implications. When it came newly, it was very difficult to sell the idea in northern Nigeria. UNICEF tried very much to do that, until the people were made known that they can amend some aspect of it to reflect the society. And that was when it was accepted and it was signed in some northern states of the country. So I asked this question: socio-cultural factors, economic underpinning, and justiciable aspect of human rights. How possible it is, Madam? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aminu. We'll take two more. That is Dr. Adegoke and Dr. Nancy Shukuma. Having some technical issues. So I will, if you see me on the phone, is the one that I'm speaking to. It's not to disrespect anybody. So it's calling me on the cell phone, but I will attend to him shortly. So Dr. Adegoke, you go to 20 seconds. Dr. Nancy Shukuma, 20 seconds, please. Thank you. Dr. Adegoke. Dr. Nancy. Nancy, I have unmuted you. Dr. Nancy, proceed, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, sir. I want to congratulate Dr. Orie. You've done a good work, but my contribution and areas that I want to seek clarification is on, I see that you made mention of incorporated, assimilated, rectified, and domesticated. And so I was wondering, you see, when you were using these words, you talked about incorporated and not assimilated, especially on the child rights issue. And then the next time again, you talked about rectification and not domesticated and other. So I was wondering, is it just, you know, the use of these terms, or is it not what we, probably me, a lay person, do not understand? You know, when you're talking about incorporation and assimilated, so what are the differences? When you say they have been incorporated in some states and in Nigeria, and on the other hand, you now say they have not been assimilated or they've not been domesticated. So I really want to, I seek clarification on that. And then the next one is that I'm looking at the relationship between, like Prof has said, the relationship between the topic itself and COVID-19. I didn't see the relationship between the topic and COVID-19. And so I'm even looking at, is it compulsory that we must attach COVID-19 to all the topics? For me, on a lighter note, it's not really, it's just like P in psychology. So it's not really necessary. For me, if the topic can be left at migration and human rights, if the topic can be left at migration and human rights, and at that level, because if you look at your conclusion and if you look at your conclusion and recommendation, you find out that everything you have listed in your conclusion and recommendation, everything borders on migration and human rights and has nothing to do with COVID-19. And so this, another one I want to look at again is your assertion that more blacks died than the whites, whereas what we read all over the internet within the said period is that whites has died, then going from the, maybe as a result of gene of the black. And so now, I don't know if that can be backed up by any data or a source, or a viable source that can actually say that what you're saying actually happened. And then it takes me back to the relationship between the house help and the COVID-19. For me, I do not see any relationship between the whole thing and what you had just said. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll allow Dr. Orie to respond to some of these questions and comments so that we can wrap it up. Please, you have, let's say, 5 minutes. Unfortunately, Dr. Adegoke, I won't be able to take you again. You keep going in and out. So, Dr. Orie, please.
Prof. Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Seya, on your observation about the implementation. We all agree that implementation is a challenge in Nigeria. But do we have a starting point if there is no regulation? How do we begin to work? How do we begin to organize the institutional framework? So while we battle with enforcement, while we battle with implementation, the regulations must be in place to take care, to make sure that there is a strong legal institutional framework to implement the laws. Just like in Nigeria, the judiciary, when I mentioned the right to education and the right to health, it is the judiciary in India that gave life to the same constitutional provision as we have in Nigeria, because they were proactive enough to do it. So it is for the judiciary to also rise up to their billing and not be cowed by or not be afraid to what the executive will say. Thank you, Dr. Williams, for your comments. You mentioned the framework for domestication, and then you mentioned, you said, what is the place of human rights in the fight against COVID-19? You realize that in the wake of COVID-19, some people could not move, which is a breach of fundamental rights. But can they sue on it at that point? There is an overriding constitutional matter section which makes it, empowers the government to be able to clamp people down because of overriding public interest. So those are the impact of COVID-19 in that area. It's not everything I'll begin to expound on the in the course of the explain in the course of the presentation, or to have it contained in the slide. So human rights, there were breaches of human rights during COVID-19, and that is where COVID-19 becomes relevant. And the place of culture, I mentioned it, that some of these breaches have to do with our cultural orientation, so that people do not even pursue their rights because of their cultural affiliations. And that's why I said, in terms of structure, to have a cultural orientation, just like similar to what we have in the rape cases now. This rape has been there all along. Many people have been raped. Although the data is saying that it is on the increase now, but it's been going on, but people were not able to come out to speak because of our cultural orientation. Now the whole thing is blown up, and people that were raped 10 years ago are coming up to say that, oh, I was raped, because our minds have been retuned to realize that, oh, it is not actually the woman who is at fault. There's nothing discriminatory. There's nothing bad about it. It's just that his right has been breached. They are now seeing rape as a right issue, not as something discriminatory. So that is the place of culture and rights. My able Dean, thanks for your observations and comments and questions. You talked about the general principles, and that I cannot approbate and reprobate at the same time, and that the definition of migration is broad. On the contrary, I gave a definition and the source of the definition. What I have done is to explain that their own definition, to say that within that definition, this group of people can come within that definition. I have not introduced any other concept. I didn't define it myself. I'm only saying that this definition, the way it is, that we should be aware that because of the way it's defined, it could be expanded, it will contain, accommodate people in this category. That is not my own definition. I don't know whether you got, maybe you didn't get that when I was explaining. Then you mentioned that African Charter on Human Rights is enforceable. Yes, it's enforceable, but yet it remains an international regulation. When you begin to mix international regulations and conventions together, they still remain international regulation, although they've been domesticated. Sometimes you see that the domesticated portion, it is not exactly the way the international convention is. So you must reflect that this is an international convention, because it's a fundamental rule of international law that when you domesticate, you take into consideration your cultural orientation, the nuances, your own environment, what is acceptable there, what can you work with. So some of the laws, when domesticated, do not come out exactly as you have it in the international conventions and protocols. That is the reason why it is necessary to also separate them. Also, for people to be able to understand the origin of such laws, one could easily lose track. Oh, this is a Nigerian decision made by the National Assembly and all that. Meanwhile, the person will not realize that the history, the origin of such laws are they have their roots in the international conventions and protocols. So when enacted, when domesticated, it makes it easier for implementation. You mentioned the ECOWAS. Somebody mentioned the ECOWAS law you mentioned that it's an international regime. There's no doubt about it. What I was referring to is there is an ECOWAS it was the agreement between Nigeria and the EU. Probably you got the protocol, you got it mixed up. The ECOWAS protocol is a regional treaty and should not, having said that, it's also an international regulation. Your question, there is another question by the fourth person. I didn't get his name very well, but I saw that he said that migration laws to be domesticated to make it easy for implementation. You were more like answering my question to the earlier questions that were asked, that when the laws are domesticated, it's easier for implementation. You cannot begin to implement what has not been domesticated. It's a cardinal principle, because our section 2, the section 12 of our constitution states expressly that no order, no arm, no portion of any foreign legislation can be applied in Nigeria, except first of all, such legislations are being given life by the National Assembly. So it is the National Assembly that breathes life on those laws before you can apply them in Nigeria. Without such application, they will be of limited import in terms of enforcement in Nigeria can be. Thank you, Professor Soglo, for your observations and comments. I'm indeed gladdened. You mentioned that you didn't see the focus of the paper, and the nexus. I mentioned, I think either the second or third slide, that the focus of the paper is on the rights of the migrants and how in this time of COVID-19, those rights have been impacted or affected. Those rights have been there, but COVID-19 came to exacerbate. It is the issue of exacerbation, the impact of COVID-19 on these existing rights. How has COVID-19 encouraged or helped or assisted in any way the breaches of these rights, or to re-entrench the breaches of this right? And that's why I mentioned the issues of racial equity. For people, there's data to say that more blacks died. The population of the whites that died is more. But when you go down to see in what ratio, there's a data from United Nations. There's also a data from United States public media report to say that these people died partly because of racism, discrimination, and health injustice. So it is not my own record, but it is the data and the details of the data I have, both for New York, both for Illinois, both for Mississippi. But I didn't, because of time, and everything cannot be contained in the slide, but the data is there. The other question I have, I didn't also get the name of the doctor. He said he said the paper is partly that the consideration of the socio-economic factors, and that it's not just the laws. How will the laws come into place when the socio-economic factors that will make it difficult is not addressed? Such issues, it is also law that will guide you in determining even the socio-economic issues. So you cannot divorce law from such issues. If you do not have a law to guide you as a working guide, how will you then begin to assess the socio-economic impact of the regulation? If, for instance, the law does not make education justiciable, how will you then begin to make education universal or compulsory for primary school? It is then you begin to generate a data. But you cannot do it if there's no law that says, make this available as a right for these people. So law it will always be a working tool Dr. Nancy, thanks for your paper, for your comments. You mentioned about incorporation. I use the word incorporated, assimilated, and domesticated. Incorporation is to assimilate, is to include, is to imbibe, is to absorb into. I'm usually careful in using the word domesticated. So when I do, I use it very cautiously because there's a level of jurisprudence hovering around it. Why should the word domesticated be used for laws? And I do not want to draw us into that aspect of the debate. So when I use domesticated, I use it very cautiously to mean incorporated, assimilated. So this law has been ratified. Ratified will mean that you've assented, you've accepted the law. So when a country accepts the law, they're also supposed to go back and reduce that law, interpret that law in the context of their own needs, in the context of their own cultural aspirations, cultural and socioeconomic situations. So the law now becomes domestic to the people. That is actually the origin of the term domesticated. So you were also wondering why COVID-19 is part of it. And I said, COVID-19 only came to exacerbate the issues that were already on the ground. It only came to bring it to the fore, to push it to limelight. And I use the example of the issue of sex. I use the example of racial discrimination. I use the example of social injustice, health injustice, in accessing the courts, in accessing medical facilities. Even in this pandemic, several of the Blacks died. There's evidence, that data, just because they couldn't access the health services. It's no different from, similar things happen, is also happening now in Nigeria. I'm trying to get any other question. That is all that I have.
I think that is all.
I don't know if there's
there's one there. Thank you. I think there is one more comment or question, but let me just summarize in a very straightforward historical or historian context. Is the fact that you strongly believe studying or talking about human rights, whether now or thereafter or in any period, is justifiable, and that more importantly, you rather contextualize human rights protection within the context of COVID-19. I believe that is what you're trying to tell us. Thank you. Dr. Joe, you have the last comment or question for 20 seconds. Apologies, I didn't see your hand or your comment until now. Dr. Joe, who is now with the Federal University of Inequity, one of those primary schools. Dr. Joe, you have the floor. That's a joke. He left us, but he has not left us.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, we can.
I also want to commend the effort of the presenter. I just have a concern and a question regarding the topic. The topic seems not really focus on Nigeria as you indicated it in the discourse. The discourse is really about Nigeria, but I realized that it was not really well captured, in the topic. So I want to suggest that you need to kind of take a second look at the topic so that it will reflect that, what you actually want to discuss in terms of migration and human rights is actually pertaining to Nigeria. Then the question I have is about, you raised some legal gaps in your discourse, while you are discussing the topic. Now, my worry is that how do the gaps you actually identified, in the discourse, how do they relate to the restrictions on migration arising from COVID-19, because you find that the purpose of the restriction during this pandemic is to curb the spread of the pandemic, which is actually, commendable on the part of the government. It is not an attempt to restrict people from exercising their right of movement. So how do the gaps you identify actually relate with the restriction of movement arising from this COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ojo. Thank you very much. Dr. Orie, we thank you. If you have a response to that, you can let me know by raising up your hand or shaking your hand. If you do not,
I do.
As we say when we go on, you do? Okay, you are one of those people that your accreditation may be kind of shaky. When they tell us you do during accreditation, we coach them, just say noted, so that you can move on. But since you do, please go ahead. You have 10 seconds, ma.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. I did mention that when regulations are giving restrictive interpretation, it becomes a challenge for implementation. And I gave, for example, example of the right to health and the right to education. That is for one. During the COVID-19, people were still clamped down, even in some places as I speak. But I also mentioned that one cannot sue on it because there's an overriding national interest for overriding public policy. You cannot sue on rights like that, even when you have been given such right as a citizen or as a migrant. All through the discussion, I mentioned that there are internal migrants and there are international migrants, and that these two sets of people comprise the migrants, the Nigerian migrants for discussion today. So when you look at the semi-skilled or semi-skilled in informal sector, when you look at the shoe cleaner, when you look at the house help, some of them came to work in another city, but got locked down because of COVID-19. It is their right that is an issue. Can they sue for locking them down? No. But some of them, because of education, what we're even suffering now is partly due to education. Some of them do not appreciate what COVID-19 is all about. Some will tell you it is not real. It is lack of education. You and I that are educated easily understand that COVID-19 is real because the data is there. But the semi-skilled worker, the shoe shiner, the woman who hawks water on the street does not appreciate what we're saying. So long as he's not dead, she wakes up in the morning, she is okay, she goes about her business. She doesn't see the need, a reason why she will use her money to buy 100 naira mask to wear, because it's not a priority for her. Her level of education, that level of deprivation, it's part of the problem. And so many people cannot afford justice, even now, because of their level of literacy. Meanwhile, their rights have been breached. So you find out that the breaches of this right run through several areas of the migrant's life. But there are ones you cannot sue because of overriding public interest. But the objective of the paper, as I said, remains to see how these rights of the migrants are affected, the breaches of this right can be protected, and how they are affected, particularly in this COVID period. COVID came as an exacerbating factor and not the original issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Let me apologize for exceeding our time today by 27 minutes. As you know, it has to do with the technical issues that we have during our presentation. And I hope I will not get any query. Okay, before we go, I will call on Professor Emeritus Sogolo. I can see your hand, sir. He will speak. I hope I'm not getting query for this. My apologies. It wasn't me. Every blame for exceeding 1 hour is Dr. Eri, Dr. Orie. So let me unmute Baba, and then, okay. Can you unmute yourself now? You have to unmute yourself, sir. Okay, now we can hear you.
All right, I think you already made the point I was going to raise. A series of discussion. You scored very high because you managed the time properly. And that, whatever the circumstances, you must try as much as possible to manage the time and still keep the time, whatever the circumstances.
Okay, sir. All right, sir. Sorry, sir.
Thanks.
Hello, sir. I can't hear him anymore. Let me unmute everybody. Well, if you can hear me, sir, we can't hear you anymore. I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody for staying with us and then for always being regular, and more importantly, for contributing and sharing your knowledge about the topics. Thank you so much. Monday, next week is another day. Thank you, and stay blessed. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.